My name is Meg Tuohey. Together we'll gather wisdom from a wide range of voices, thought leaders and seekers just like you. Through individual stories, we'll explore multiple categories of wisdom and uncover how the stripes of our experiences, both joyful and challenging and all that lies in between, intertwine to create a rich tapestry of life. So whether you're looking for inspiration, guidance, or simply a moment of reflection, you're in the right place. This is Wisdom Stripes. Faryn Clark is an entrepreneur, warrior in social justice, and leader in fair trade and financial inclusion. Originally from Houston, Faryn felt pulled to move to Mexico in 2016. She fell in love with the pace of life, the people, the history, and the culture. Her and her family live in Cabo San Lucas, where she opened the first Eclectic Array store. Eclectic Array is truly a special space in a fair trade space. This store allows consumers to buy products from Indigenous artists, range both from her store and online, and the sales have a direct impact on the artists' lives. This practice not only puts money in the artists' pockets, but has the ability to give autonomy to artisan communities, allowing them to practice their craft and pass on their wisdom and art rituals, I guess. Faryn was inspired by the founder of Kiva, Jessica Jackley, and the concept of giving artists microloans, allowing them more freedom to create their art. Welcome to Wisdom Stripes, Faryn, where we are your no-nonsense, fierce fairy godmothers, turning pain and confusion into clarity and confidence. Faryn, let's kick us off with our big question. What wisdom would you like a listener to come away with today?
Thank you so much. I think something that, wisdom for me that's been so important has just been an aspect of really living in purpose and passion every day, or doing whatever that resonates with you, like in each day.
Let's unpack this. Tell us about an aha moment that you've had that has led to profound change in your life.
I had a moment. I was living in Dallas, Texas at the time, and just was driving in traffic, had been in corporate America, had a business on the side, was in, dabbling in an entrepreneurship as well, and had 3 little boys, and recognized that I was living every day based on what other people told me that I should be doing, not necessarily what was aligned for what I felt like was true to me. And there was a specific moment, I'm sitting in traffic, and I'm like starting to feel angry. I'm getting mad and I'm seeing like, what is going on? And trying to figure out what's going on. As I pull up to this school, there's like gorillas coming out of a car, out of SUVs, and shoe polished windshields, and just like streamers and foghorns and everything going on, to find out that it was 5th grade graduation. And I was like, 5th grade graduation caused a 45-minite traffic jam on one street. And as silly as that is, like in that moment, where I want to be somebody that celebrates life and achievements and all of these things. But I was like, for crying out loud, it's 5th grade graduation. It's not high school. It's not college. And in that moment, I went home and I told my husband, I said, like, my kids are either going to think that I am the most bitter person or a bad mom because I don't want to participate in this, because of the community that we live in, that's what you do. And I just didn't feel aligned in that moment, and just asked him, I said, will you give me an opportunity for us to do life different? And I don't know what that looks like, but I just felt like we needed a reset where we could design life. Not to say that our life or our choices were better than anybody else's, but it was just a moment that it was like trying to find what was right for us in that time. So it was like, seemed so silly. And at the same time, was kind of a profound moment to where I was able to have that conversation with him to where he could be open with doing life, like making on our own terms.
Right. And one of the things that I love to talk about and teach about is about your living your internal life, your authentic self, and matching that to your external life. And it feels like, although for some people, the life of a grade 5 graduation and that whole experience is a complete match. For you in that moment, you were like, this is a mismatch. This isn't, there's some internal cues that I'm getting. And I understand that I need to adjust my life so that it matches more of who I am. Is that what you're sharing?
Yeah, for sure. I had friends that thought that I was crazy. They thought that I was crazy, that I didn't get it, that that's what we needed to do. They're like, but you have the house and you have the car and you have the business and you're living in the right neighborhood and your kids go to the right schools. And I was like, okay, but is this what we are working so hard for? Is this it? And so just to your point, really being able to find what's the alignment for me.
Tell us around this space, the idea I've heard you speak to something greater than ourselves. Does this tie in to your change? Or maybe even tell us, what does it mean by something greater than ourselves?
I had this moment where we were doing like a spiritual gifts test, like an assessment. And mine came up and said, like the results on my survey said that my spiritual gift was international missions. And I was like, international missions? I live in Dallas, Texas, in the middle of, Highland Park. And what am I doing? Like, there is no international mission aspect of like, I love travel. I love impact. I love communities. But it wasn't a part of my daily life. I owned a skincare spa. It had nothing to do with anything for international missions. I was making ladies look younger. And now, I guess 20 years ago, I didn't value that. Right now, I'm like, heck yeah, I'm making people look younger. That's amazing. So, but at the time, that's not something that I fully understood or appreciated. And yet I got, so getting that alignment for me and kind of seeing like, what does that mean? And I just put it on the side and had to trust and like was trying to listen and say, what does this mean? If this is a gift, what could that look like in my life? And it wasn't for a couple of years later that it actually very organically showed up. It was not something that I went and forced. It was just being able to be open and listen and see what was really delivered, if that makes any sense.
It really does. Do you feel like that quiz drove change? Were you skeptical? Like what was your experience like with seeing this? I can hear the confusion, like how does that even match my current life? But I can also hear the resonance. So tell us how much of an impact that quiz had.
I think it just planted a seed, honestly, that the seed, I think sometimes all it takes is just that seed to be planted. And then when you're in that moment in life and things show up, then you know that that's really for you. And that's really where it was at. It showed up in that way. Things started showing up. We were in Mexico on vacation and my husband said, okay, I get it. We can move. And I was like, what? After all this, and you're saying we can sell everything and move to Mexico and like, you don't care anymore. And so and things like that just kept showing up in my life that I recognized weren't coincidences at all, that it was just unfolding and life was happening for me to be able to have that connection to my purpose.
There's a real feeling that you get when the path is unfolding in front of you and you keep taking the next step and you can't be sure how it's going to come together, but you can feel that it is. Those are the moments in life, I think, where we're really using our wisdom to divine our pathway forward. It's kind of got some real feeling about it, It's resonant and powerful and strong.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's so powerful.
So can you let us in on those conversations you had with your husband around purpose and moving? Like, Where was he in this process? I understand you were like the one hit by the inspiration, but I can also hear that he came with you because, spoiler alert, you now do live in Mexico. So tell us about it. How did that happen?
Yeah, he, our family and all of our friends, and at the time his coworkers, and they all thought he was crazy. Everyone thought we were both crazy. When we met, he had actually never even been to Mexico. He had been one time out of the country to Costa Rica, and that was the extent of his international travel ever. And so to go tell this Kentucky boy that that I have a desire to live abroad, and I don't know what life looks like, but I want to take my babies that at the time were 2, 4, and 6 to Mexico. He's like, what? So it really, I think it just was a journey of trust, to be honest. He was always an unbelievable supporter of everything that I did. And really through that support and trust and in our relationship was not exactly agreeable, I'll say, because it did take him several years to get to that. But I had talked about living abroad from the moment we met. And so at that point, it had been like 8 years. It's not like it was a new thing. It just wasn't necessarily something that felt like a reality.
You used the word reset. How would you say that began? How did that begin?
How did the actual reset begin?
Yeah.
When we actually, the reset began for us once we made the decision to live life differently. Once we were on the same page, we were a team, and we recognized this was our chance to decide, to really design our life. And as we stepped into that, before we ever even made the move, we knew that we were drawing a line in the sand and being very intentional about the decisions that we made moving forward. Decisions with our kids, with schooling, with health, with how and where we were going to live and what life would look like, and just a day to day. And so, it really started the moment we said yes. It didn't need to be anything dramatic. I think we think that it has to be like this, oh my gosh, and until something happens and there's this big kaboom, that it's not, there isn't a shift. But the shift really came from concept. It really came from it being that seed that we were talking about. That seed was planted. We agreed to that forward motion. And once we decided, just in the decision, we were already in that reset.
What was the process like with children? And also, I'm curious, why Mexico? So I've got 2 questions in the same question just there.
The process with young children specifically is always an adventure. It's an adventure just going on vacation, which we're not even allowed to call vacation with young children, right? Don't they say it's a trip when it's children, and then when you go with adults or whatnot, that's a vacation. So doing a move like that and redesigning your life in that way certainly had its challenges. We moved, my youngest, we moved on his 3rd birthday. And they were 3, 4, and 6 when we arrived in Mexico. There were so many crazy challenges, and you think that you have everything organized and planned. And I think that that's something also that we want to plan it all out and we want it to look a certain way. And then we realize that we really aren't in control. As much as we want to be control freaks and have a plan, it just doesn't work that way. So we had planned this trip that we were going to leave from Texas and drive through the US and touch all of these national parks and do some hiking and stop in Disney and see some family along the way, and then drive down Baja. And the week before this trip, at the time, President Obama was in office, and they closed all the national parks. And so literally the entire trip that we had planned was no longer available. And so we were trying to, pivot and figure out, what are we doing and how are we going to do this? And in that moment, when we have those struggles, sometimes it's easy to be able to just say, you know what? The world's against us. What are we doing? We're crazy. We're not going to do this. Or we could sit there and say, you know what? It's okay. This is not a deal breaker. How are we, what's our next move? And so it wasn't a big deal. It wasn't a deal breaker. It just, I think sometimes the speed bumps throw us off course. Mexico specifically, like why we chose Mexico, my family spent a lot of time in Mexico as I was growing up. And so it very much felt like a second home to me, where I was really comfortable. I knew that I had an opportunity to reset and also to be grounded. Have you ever been in a place where you're like, you feel at home, but you don't feel like you're in a race? There's no judgment. There's no competition. It's not keeping up with the Joneses. It's, you just feel like you can show up and be yourself. And that's what Mexico was for me.
How incredible to find your matching place.
Right? I always wonder, like, where does that historically in our life, like, how are we connected to a place in a way, spiritually or whatever that string is that's pulling at us, that we feel called or connected to? Because for me, my grandmother was born in Mexico, but she wasn't Mexican. She was born in Mexico, but she was Lebanese. And it was just a kind of coincidence. Yet I had a lot of history with family and whatnot. When my family immigrated from the Middle East to the US, they ended up living in Mexico. And so there was a strong connection in that way, but it just really felt like home, even though I had never lived there myself and had spent a considerable amount of time, but certainly not, certainly not to the point of living there with kids and family and I didn't know what life was going to be like.
This is a pretty magical piece of your story, and I can really feel sort of the threads of your ancestors woven in to this place, which is not from your perhaps cultural heritage, and it's not from where you were born, like America. It's this magical third space. So could you tell us more about your family? Did it and how that interacted in your decision around Mexico? And maybe is there a gift in here of honoring them, or like a full circle kind of thing?
100%. So my dad, when he was young, left the Middle East during the war. He was actually born in Palestine. And when he came to the U.S., when my dad came to the U.S., they knew that there was family that was living in Mexico. And so they went down to Mexico and they lived very close to the border, and they would cross the border every day for school. So he grew up going to school in Texas, but living in Matamoros. And when I was growing up, because that had been such a big part of his life, he would always tell me in Mexico that they were like his people. And I never really understood that. However, I think that for him, losing your home and having to go away from home, not necessarily by choice, and having to start over, and then being in a place with new people that actually welcomed you. Maybe not your family welcoming you, but strangers in a sense. You don't speak the language and you're having to go and start over anew. And he was living between two countries where he didn't speak Spanish or English as a young child, and was having to do everything from nothing. And so it was funny, but he would tell me that all the time. He was like, these are my people. These are my people. And so I think that was so deeply rooted in him. And I don't really know where it came through in a connection to me. But it was something that I definitely adopted somewhere along the way in the work that I do and in the life that I live now and in the way that it's a huge part of my children's life. And so generationally, not only my past and my, you know, my parents, like my dad and his family, but also the next generation with my own children, being able to experience whatever this thread is that has been a gift to him.
So he spoke, what language did he speak as a child?
Arabic.
So a person who spoke Arabic moved to, went to school in America, English, and lived in Mexico, Spanish. And when he made the move, which wasn't his choice, it was to do with the war, he had no language of either place. And yet he had a feeling of being at home. If you could guess, what would you guess the thread is between the similarities of Mexico and the Middle East? Where does the familiarity come from for him?
I don't even know that it was necessarily a familiarity from country to country. I think that it was more about being welcomed into a place when you imagine being shunned from one, but welcomed to another. And where you lose everything in one home and one, like your life as you know it is gone. And yet being able to show up in a new place and then that become home. I think it's more of a story of welcoming and acceptance than it is something that I think reminded him of, like a similarity of his past.
So that tells me, or what I interpret from that is like it is a moving forward on the path. It's not trying to go back and make something the same. He was following his path unfolding. He needed to leave, and he found himself in a place that allowed him to move forward and to grow forward. And that now has sort of sprinkled itself across the rest of his family and generations post him. That's pretty magical stuff.
Yeah, it really is. And what a gift to embrace that and to not be bitter. The way that he showed love for that country, for the country of Mexico, and for the life that he was able to live and to restart, was something that I have an opportunity to even experience at this part of my life and to feel maybe what he even felt.
So it's like a pilgrimage of sorts, an ancestral walking in a similar set of footsteps to understand, and that calling is deep within you, isn't it?
Yeah, it's so crazy. All of these things that happen in life as life unfolds, and the things that we don't even know or understand, that how we're tied together, not just by blood, but things that show up in life. I mean, I never knew that my family was in retail and that I had all of these family, like different family members that had retail stores. It's like, I have dozens of retail stores and never knew that that was part of something that was like ingrained in my family as well. And so it's so funny just that it showed, like, all of these things show up in so many different ways as our connection from the past.
So let's talk about this, because you have a store that is online and you have physical presence stores called Eclectic Array. And we've talked a little bit about some of these threads, which I just find so fascinating on. But tell us how you found yourself opening Eclectic Array, and tell us a little bit about your work.
So I had just moved to Mexico. I had no idea what I was doing here, and was traveling back and forth, doing a little consulting. And at the time, I knew that in that reset moment, I had an opportunity and a choice to be able to make conscious decisions. And I can't say this was a conscious decision getting into like starting Eclectic Array. I think that it was something that just showed up for me. I loved travel and I loved storytelling. And that travel, that passion for travel and storytelling and being able to hear about other people's lives, and to be able to tell others about the people that I met and their journeys and how special they were. So anyway, I started doing pop-ups at my house as a hobby, essentially, not knowing that it was going to be a business. It was back when, Facebook was doing all the flash sales and everything. And I was like, I can do that too. I'll do a pop-up at my house. And I did a couple pop-ups at my house. And then my husband said, you've got to get this stuff out of our house. Our house is not a store. And so I started doing farmers markets. My dog was my co-founder. And she was the only one that essentially believed in me, that I would tell people that she was the only one that believed in me. My dog and I would go to farmers markets and set up. And when I had nobody else and my husband told me that I was spending more money in gas than I ever made at these farmers markets. And so it's like, oh man. So my dog would sit there and she'd jump in the car and be happy as we went each time. But really what happened was through this journey, I connected with customers that would walk up to my table in a tent. And I had an opportunity to share with them about each product that I had purchased from artisans all across Mexico. And I had an opportunity to represent them when they didn't have exposure to a greater audience. They lived in very rural, remote communities in Mexico that didn't have that representation. And so it's like I kind of got to be a store for them, just telling their stories. So I started doing that until it got to be, it was my car with my table and my tent and everything that I had was exploding. And people started asking for a location that they could go to any day of the week. And so from there, we had stores that started opening. So that was kind of the beginning of Eclectic Array, early days.
Right. Well, tell us now where Eclectic Array is so that we can see what you've grown in this time.
8 years in from having our first store, the end of this year, we'll have 21 locations. And we are in several different 5-star hotels all across Mexico and the Caribbean, from Four Seasons, St. Regis, Montage, like amazing high-end, beautiful properties in Los Cabos and Puerto Vallarta and Punta Mita, Riviera Maya and San Miguel de Allende and Nevis. And it's just really unbelievable. I literally pinch myself every day that for me, something that was a hobby turned into something that had massive impact for others. And it really took me back to that whole international missions of that survey that I took years ago that I never knew was going to show up in my life in this way.
Hey there, Meg Tuohey here with a quick and exciting announcement. As a psychologist, coach, and founder of the Wisdom Lab, I've had the privilege of helping thousands of individuals break free from the vicious cycles holding them back and tap into their infinite inner wisdom. If you're tired of feeling unheard, unseen, and stuck in the same old struggles, the Wisdom Lab is the breakthrough you've been yearning for. This on-demand program guides you through a powerful process to shatter emotional barriers, overcome deep-rooted blocks, and experience the profound transformation you deserve. In just 4 hours, you'll gain the tools and insights to revolutionize your life from the inside out. Want to learn more? Click or tap the link in the show notes for all the details. Okay, now back to the episode. There's a real spiritual thread all the way through this. We keep referencing threads, and it's like all the different ways that your life has come together. And some of them are driven by kind of your own sort of purpose and soul and self, and others come from some of your heritage. And I am really curious around the journey of this set of stores, this experience of artisan products through eclectic array. Let me say it again. Through eclectic array. Tell us about how that intersects with your heritage and your mission or your purpose. How does it all fit together?
I think for me, really recognizing not only how I was raised. I was raised. Yes, I was raised coming to Mexico on vacation. And for Christmas, we would go out into the colonias and give out. One of my siblings, my brother or my dad, would dress as Santa Claus, and we would give out gifts. That was like a regular Christmas tradition. And we were really raised to be part of the community, not to just live in the community. And I think my dad's deep love for Mexico and showing that passion really connected me. And I had a very, very deep sense of place to where I felt very connected. I felt very much at home. And maybe that's where the reset, that's why the reset happened in this place. That's why I felt called. That's why I felt comfortable. It gave me a safe space to be able to show up and to be myself in a different way. And then if I had to look into it deeper, if you really think about being curious and the way that we show up, think about wisdom, and wisdom, so much of wisdom comes from being open and curious and learning from others. And by being able to align with people all around me that I knew, every person that I came in contact with could teach me something through their stories. Their stories became part of my life. I was able to take their stories forward and share them with others, and then be able to connect those people, those others, the customers, back to them. That was like life-giving. So I don't know, that's kind of a long answer for the thread, essentially, the thread that kind of connected the heritage and my passion, and how I then took it forward into the stores, taking these unbelievable Indigenous and impoverished artisans into retail with me on a journey. And we essentially partnered. We became a family, and those people became my family here in Mexico. I have now over 500 groups of artisans that I work with across Mexico. Not 500 people, 500 groups. So one group may be a family, another may be 50 women in a rural community in Chiapas, another may be an individual, a guy that hand paints hats, and his wife that does embroidery, and her friends that she gathers together. And so they genuinely are a huge part of my life, and I absolutely consider them my family.
So this feels really magical and sparkly to me. It is like just the way your dad experienced that. I can hear he was close to the border and crossed over. It feels like the experience of you goes right through Mexico, right through every kind of nook and cranny, right through the north and the south and the east and the west, and all of the pieces or parts in between. And you have invited into your life such richness in terms of people and connections, and being a part of sort of it's a product moving, but it's an energy moving, because the stories move and they educate and they enrich, and the artisans are giving and receiving. So it's really like balance and there's harmony. That feels really incredible. Did you, when you compare that to the knowingness moment of being stuck in a traffic jam for 45 minutes, it feels very different, doesn't it?
Absolutely. In every way. It doesn't mean we don't have and experience annoying, hard things, right? You know, it's not like we don't have traffic jams in Mexico. We're not, we aren't free from daily frustrations. And yet, I think, just as we were talking earlier, really that connection to a calling, to where regardless of the frustrations that you feel, you still feel an integrity of how you are, or who you are supposed to be, or how you want to live your life.
I think I maybe have some words for this. It feels like you have to live life anyway, and you're going to have troubles and jeopardy and traffic and fifth grade graduations. You're going to have that anyway. Why not have it in a life or a context that really match who you are?
For sure. For sure.
Yeah.
It sounds kind of fairy tale, honestly. You know, it's funny having this conversation here with you now in this moment. Like, oh yeah, many people are like, of course you want to just move to this vacation destination and live out this life. It's like, that's not what it was. It was so much more. It was so much more than that. It was just, it was like not feeling right in your skin. It just, like, it didn't resonate. It's not, there wasn't anything wrong with what I was doing or where I was and how I was living or my friends or the circle that I was influenced in that way. I just didn't feel like I was showing up as my best self in that space.
So I feel like, let's talk about your boys really quickly. They now have grown up in Mexico. Theoretically, I think speak at least 2 languages, probably maybe more. What is their life like, and what have they lost anything by going to Mexico? Have they gained anything by going and living in Mexico? Like, what's their context like?
I feel like I'm envious of my kids in many ways, being able to see life through their eyes. I feel like I'm constantly living vicariously through them, and yet do recognize that in the move that they've also had a lot of sacrifices, that they haven't had the same opportunities that they would had we stayed in the US. When we moved here, we didn't know about the schooling and the education and what that was going to be like, and how they were going to need to have maybe some supplemental education in high school. But the things that they have been able to do and the way that it allowed us to do life differently, they're not each in 3 sports and playing instruments and doing every club that they possibly could, because we don't have those things. We have a small school, we're in a small town, and that's just not part of the culture in Mexico, frankly, where they're in a school sport and a club sport and everything else. Those things don't exist. So for them, they're athletic little boys, and not little anymore. They're 13, 15, and 17. However, I do recognize that they didn't have the same athletic opportunities growing up that they would have in the US. And for a son that loves basketball, and for one that is obsessed with football, that was hard. That was hard. So at the same time, by us living abroad and being able to travel and essentially living a multicultural life, they also see the world to be a lot smaller than what it would have been had we stayed in our bubble. my 17-year-old, when he was 15 years old, was on a boat around the world, going to 20 different countries, studying with 65 students as he was sailing, and wasn't afraid to travel by himself. I can't imagine at 15 flying by myself with multiple stops along the way to be able to get on a boat in Norway and go, no problem, let's go. So they see the world differently than they would have had we stayed in the place that we were. And I think that that's really beautiful, that it has given them the gift of an openness to humanity, to people that are different from they are, and to see it good. So I love that for them. I love it for them, even though they do remind me of the things that they don't have easy. My oldest right now is in the middle of taking tests for, college, doing his SATs. We don't even have the ability to take the tests here. He has to get on 1 or 2 planes to be able to get out of the town that we live in, just to be able to go and take something as simple as an SAT test for college application. So it definitely is not the straight and narrow, like easy path, but it's been a beautiful one.
Yeah. And sometimes, like, whatever you do, there's a cost, and whatever you don't do, there's a cost. And it's about weighing up which ones you'll trade and which ones you won't. And you have to use that heart kind of compass to guide you. And that's the only way I think you don't have regrets. It's the only way where you're like, this was what was right for us. And there are costs and benefits regardless. There is traffic and problems regardless. But how do we want to live? Now, there's one other key person in this story I'd love to know a little bit more about, and that is what it's like for your beautiful husband all these years later, who now lives in Mexico. And it wasn't his dream. Has he adapted? Is he thriving? Is he a very sad shell of a human? Like, what has happened?
Oh, poor guy. He is such a sport. I literally have drove him across the country, had him move from Chicago to Cincinnati to San Antonio to Dallas, and then convince him to move to Mexico. Like, what? Like, what a sport. So he has been an unbelievable cheerleader, and I'll say, like, my biggest fan. And at the same time, he's like my biggest fan and my worst enemy. Have you ever had that where, like, God, this person loves me so much, and yet at the same time, he wants to fight with me on, like, we work together, which is a crazy dynamic anyway. And so being able to do life together and work together and parent, it presents its challenges, but I'm really lucky and blessed to have him. And it doesn't mean it's easy, right? Like, especially aligning to my vision that, like you said, wasn't his.
I actually live the very same life, and my beautiful husband parents with me, works with me, travels with me, is like my biggest champion ever, and is also like this, I totally get it. And it's my vision, and he loves to be with me, but I am definitely the same as you. Yeah.
Yeah. It's so crazy. His title in our company he's our CFO, but he says CFO doesn't stand for Chief Financial Officer. It stands for Chief Feminist Officer.
Yeah.
Because he is, has 58 women, 58 out of 60 people in our company are women, and 58 people every day that are women telling him what to do. So he is constantly ruled by women all around him, amazing, strong, awesome women. And he is incredibly supportive of each and every one of them, and plays that role really well.
That is literally the same. And we might have 3 or 4 men and a couple of contractors and a couple that are more permanent. And he is like the only man, and he has women for miles, miles and miles. And he is the same. I could give him that new title. He'd probably like it.
Yeah, he should take that.
Well, we could share it. Let's share it.
That's right. That's right. It is. It's a great role for him to play. And at the same time, I think that I'm constantly trying to find a way to support him in finding his voice as well. So I think that balance in our marriage and relationship, you asked me, like, is he happy? I think that he says he's happy. He's happy because he loves to support me. And yet I want him to be happy because he's happy, like, with what he does too. And so trying to help him find his happy, not just support mine, is something that, is part of the exploration process after 20 years, over 20 years together.
I have another question for you. Faryn, you've said there's no coincidences in life. I think as we're heading to the end of our conversation, this is one of our last spiritual wisdoms that we can talk about, I reckon, for today anyway. You have said there are no coincidences in life. What do you mean by this statement?
I'll often tell people stories about all the things that have unfolded since I started deciding to like listen to what I felt like was a calling or what was right for me. And things happen in my life that's like, I wasn't supposed to be there, but I happened to be at the right place at the right time in that moment. And it led me to something unbelievably amazing. And that continues to happen over and over and over. And it's like this alignment and this reminder that I'm on the right path and that I just need to keep putting one foot in front of the other, that I know and recognize fully that this is it. This is it. This is my purpose. This is my passion. And it's okay. I'm doing, I don't need to stray, that I'm on the right path. So I love those little coincidences that are not coincidences at all, but just keep showing up. It's like breadcrumbs, where I keep picking up these little breadcrumbs, and I was like, oh, and here's another one. I'm on the right path. And I just, it's been so magic. It's been so magic. And I don't feel like that's been my whole life. I feel like it was just in the essence of being able to have this awareness and to choose a path that felt right for me.
I like to see those moments of coincidences that aren't coincidences as confirmation. Aha, I've got it. Yes. And I like seeing them everywhere. They're all through nature. They're all through all the things. I love it. It's one of the things that I'm like, yep, keep going, keep going. And I now have them in such a way that they're sort of part of my internal conversation all the time.
For sure. It's like a bank of them that I recall often, to remember, okay, that happened. And they just keep showing up.
Well, if you wouldn't mind, would you share your favorite one with us, or 2 or 3 if they need to go together? Because sometimes it's really nice to hear how other people do it. You and I know what we're talking about, but perhaps somebody else is like, what? What do you mean? What do you mean nature shows up? What do you mean there are coincidences? So what is an example?
That's such a good point, because it does sound very mysterious almost, but I think that it's very easy to miss because it's not something that you may necessarily be looking for. I'll give you an example. One evening, I wasn't supposed to be at one of our stores. It was the 3rd store we had opened. I wasn't supposed to be there. I just happened to pop in, said hi to one of the girls that was working that evening. And she asked me if I would stand in the store with her while she ran to the restroom. She's like, will you cover the store? I need to run to the restroom really quick. She runs out and a group comes in. And in that moment, I was just talking, no different than I would talk to any other customer opportunity experience. And I literally had been there for maybe 1 minute. They walk right in. I engage with them in talking to this unbelievable, amazing human being. I find out that he was the resort manager for a hotel that was coming to town. And I was just naturally telling him what we did and why we did it. Told him the story about working with artisans, giving impoverished and Indigenous individuals opportunity they wouldn't otherwise have, and being able to represent Mexico. And in a way that tourism can respect and honor the heritage of Mexico, the culture that is in this amazing country, the arts, and in many cases, like a dying trade, things that are not being respected and honored that if we don't have preservation, that they will just only live in museums. And how can we make them more relevant to today within ethical fashion? And I'm having this like heartfelt conversation with this complete stranger that I don't know who he is, but just passionately sharing with him to find out that he says, oh, and he hands me his business card and he says, I'd love to invite you to our property so that, you can check it out. And I was so clueless. I said, I'd love that. I want to go check out a hotel under construction. And I show up and he walks me into this cement pad and asks me a couple days later what I would do with that space. And it was so surreal. I start just telling him, not thinking that it was for me, but just in a giving way of telling him like, oh, I would do this and I would do this. And in our dialogue, it turns into he's essentially vetting me to take on this store that I'm like little old me. My dog and I started with a pop-up with a table and a tent, and we have a couple locations. I have no idea what I'm doing. And you're trusting me and taking a chance. And you're an international hotel chain. Like, where did I come into play? And so somebody taking a chance on me from a moment of meeting that I wasn't even supposed to be there. It was not planned. There was no introduction. I knew no one. And that serendipitous moment then led us on this unbelievable journey to be able to have exposure that we wouldn't have otherwise had as a brand, and that gave our mission a greater purpose in being able to support the artisans that we did at a much larger scale that just has exploded. And there were so many things that turned into another thing that I was at the right place at the right time. I met a stranger that ended up taking something for me to the US, complete stranger that introduced me to somebody else. And on and on and on, that these beautiful introductions that were very happenstance, that were unplanned, just through connection in humanity, I'll say, where I was trying to help someone out and they in turn were trying to help me out. And then these life things unfolded that ended up being massive, not like a little thing, but it just unfolded to be, a mega multi-million-dollar business that had massive impact for so many people.
That is the exact kind of fabric of life. We're back to my cloth thread metaphor, which is so curious because I'm looking at eclecticarray.com and I can see images of your artisans with cloth and thread making products. And that feels like how this story has kind of come to life is all of these threads, this openness, this yes kind of position. And also I hear a real generosity in you, which was just like, I happen to be here and you're talking to me and how can I help? And of course, and in all of that kind of service of others, there is still that connection deep within self. You're not honoring yourself by doing that. You're just in that flow of life and it's unfolding for you and it's serving so many people. So there's some people on some side of the thread that are connected to other people on the other side of the threads. One's making, one's receiving. You're the storyteller in the middle. It's just the most beautiful woven experience of honoring your own wisdom and following your guidance to make what your journey of life is. It's extraordinary. I have a question though. I have a question. My last question. Very last. What remains unresolved? What is next for you? We can see where you are. We can see the size of your business, the size of your artisan community, the impact your products are having. What is your next frontier?
That's the magic question always, right? I think the what's next for me is really a balance in being able to continue this work that I'm so unbelievably passionate about. And also trying to find a balance in harmony in life. When you feel such a strong calling to what you do in your work and you fully dive in and are so committed to the people and the purpose and the cause. I also recognize that I let myself personally suffer, my health, even like I work out, I'm active. There's still so much more in being able to take care of yourself and to be able to take care of the others around you. And it's my boys' last year together, all three of them at home. And so I just have this strong desire right now to continue massive growth beyond, and to have that growth be global, for our stores and for the artisans and for our employees and our team, and find a way that I can find harmony for myself and my family, that I'm not sacrificing myself for my cause that I am so passionate about.
I love that. It is the next frontier is the sitting in or the deepening of what you've done, and perhaps the enjoyment of being together in this last season of life before it shifts in your beautiful home and it goes on to its next iteration, which is perfectly healthy, but also, you kind of want to hold that in a cherished way together.
Yeah. The balance of growth. It's like growth and sitting still. How do you do it all?
Yeah. It's peace and growth, isn't it? That contentment and stretch.
That's right.
It's like the duality of both. And I think we're in a relationship with that as a push-pull, that just, you never land on it and are like, I'm done. We're always in relationship with life. Yeah. Okay. Well, I think we're ready to wrap up for now. So Faryn, I'm going to do our outro, and you, my friend, are off the hook. So I would like to say a big thank you for coming, Faryn. You shared such a lovely open heart with us. And I'm so grateful that we had the time to unpack and understand your experience of life. Thank you for sharing that so freely with us.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be connected to you. And it was almost like a gift in itself to me to have some of these realizations just in our conversations. Thank you.
That was Faryn Clark, founder and owner of Eclectic Array. She shared with us her journey towards herself, listening to her intuition and finding her purpose by leaning into spirituality and eventually moving herself and her young family to Mexico. She stepped into the unknown by moving away from the status quo and discovered a multicultural life and her purpose in something greater than ourselves. She also acknowledges that she's given her children a different life, a choice, on the balance, she doesn't regret. If you have enjoyed this episode, listen to all of our back catalogue wherever you get your podcasts. And please follow me on Instagram at Meg Tuohey Official. Until then, my name is Meg Tuohey. This is Wisdom Stripes, where we are your no-nonsense, fierce fairy godmothers, turning pain and confusion into clarity and confidence. Thank you for listening to this episode of Wisdom Stripes. Follow me on at Meg Tuohey Official and leave a comment and review. I'm looking forward to meeting you here next time on Wisdom Stripes.